Hi, I'm John. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, John.
I hope I do a good job for you today. I wasn't able to give this a whole lot of thought, but I jotted down some notes. But most of it's just going to be it's going to be my story. Recently, we had a meeting at our group where we decided that what we would do is we just kind of go around and share our stories. And there were a couple of people in the meeting who said, "Oh, there's nothing that bores me more than my own drunkalogue." And, I can understand that to a certain degree. And we do in AA sometimes refer to our stories as drunkalogues. But there's probably nothing more important than our own personal story of recovery. Because that is what helps, let's put it this way. It helps the teller of the story because our stories change as we get better and evolve, as we learn more about ourselves during our recovery. But it also helps the person out there who might be new and coming into recovery from alcoholism or drug addiction for the first time. Our stories provide a way for us to relate to each other and to understand that there's hope. When I went to my very first AA meeting, people told me their stories in kind of a general way, and it was very helpful to me because I knew I wasn't alone. And from their deportment, just the way that they were, I could tell that the stories that they were telling me were in the past. And I really needed to have that hope. So I'm going to share with you a little bit. And I also want to say something. I read a book recently that I really enjoyed. It was called Parallel Universes. And it's a memoir of a recovering alcoholic. And in his story, he talks about his mother giving him up for adoption when he was born. And he was adopted by a very loving family who always was open to him about his adoption. And he thought it was something entirely normal. He always felt good about being adopted. Well, when he was 6 years old, he was with some friends, and he decided to share with them for the first time his story about being adopted. And he was surprised and stunned when he saw the look and the expression on his friends' faces, because they gave him this look like there was something wrong with him for being adopted. And that, for him, was that was a resentment, I guess. That was something that he remembered and carried with him for the rest of his life. And the way that he put it is he felt shame. And so I started thinking about the role of shame in my early calling to drink. And I also thought about having these parallel universes in my own life. I was thinking about some of the people who influenced me the most in my life, my mother, my father, and my grandmother. And I loved all of them. They did some things, though, that they weren't, put it this way, I'm going to say some things about these people I love that might paint them in a bad light. But I've come to understand that they are human. And as human beings, we're very complex. We're not good, we're not bad, but we're both good and bad at the same time. So through my recovery, I learned to find some understanding, and I was able to come together with this complex relationship, because I'm complex too. I'm good, I'm bad, I'm both. So I'm going to start my story off by telling you just a little bit about my background and how I grew up. My mother and father were born in a small town in Florida, New Smyrna Beach, and my family goes back there many generations. And my father wanted to leave that town because there wasn't a lot of work there other than being in the railroad, so he joined the Army, and he made a career in the military. So when I grew up, I moved around a lot and lived in a lot of different kinds of places. We lived overseas. We lived in different states in the United States. And I learned, I guess, as a young kid to adapt to different environments and to kind of become the person that these other places might want me to be. There was also in my family, I would say that I was loved. But when I think about some of my earliest memories, they are probably memories of fear. I lived in a house where my parents were fighting a lot. My father would beat us. My mother would say degrading things about us. And so I say these things about them, and it's true. But at the same time, these same people could be loving and funny, and we could go on trips, and I could be around them and feel secure. So how I put those two things together, I don't know. But the underlying issues in my household made me feel insecure. I didn't feel safe. My father, being a military person, there was always a lot of alcohol in the house. He didn't have a problem with drinking, but it was more of a social thing to have all of the Army guys over, and they would have these big parties. And as a 8, 9-year-old boy, after these parties ended, I would go downstairs and I would drink the alcohol from the glasses that were left over after these parties. I don't know what I was doing. I think I was using alcohol as some sort of a medicine. There was something about it that made me feel better. By the time I was 12, I think, I got drunk for the first time. And it was one of those situations where one was good, so another would be better, and another would be better, and another would be better. And my drinking really didn't change much after that. I felt remorseful. I felt ashamed of myself, and I promised myself that I wouldn't do it again. And I didn't until I got into high school. And when I resumed drinking, it was just the same as when I had left off as a kid. So I never really drank normally. I drank as a way to cope. I drank as a way to somehow find connection with other people. I think that's especially true when I was in high school. And it's difficult enough to be a teenager and in high school, and nobody feels like they fit in. But I certainly didn't. But when I drank, I felt like I did. But ultimately, what was happening as my drinking got worse, it was driving me away, actually, from other people. Even it seemed like among my high school friends, and then when I went to college, my college friends, that I didn't drink quite like they did. And so it's pretty bad when you're living in a fraternity at college and they lock you up in your room because you're too wild at parties. So what happened to me, though, my drinking became a problem for me early on in my life. I was 19 years old when I first thought that I might be an alcoholic, and I considered calling AA. At the time, I was going to school at KU, and I wasn't doing very well. And I had a lot of problems. People were upset with me about my drinking, and I was really concerned about it. And there was an ad in the Lawrence Journal World about AA, and there was their phone number. If you need help, call us. And I thought about it, but I thought, no, I'm just too young. I rationalized in my mind that I was too young to be an alcoholic. So I continued to drink, and I had to leave school because of bad grades, and I ended up getting different jobs here and there, and I drank a lot. I started having other problems too. I was looking for some sort of a solution to my drinking, and I was not a religious person. I didn't grow up going to church or anything, but I thought that maybe there might be some sort of a solution in religion. And I was woefully ignorant about it. I didn't know anything about the Bible and so forth. So I studied it, I read it, I studied it, I took a class on the New Testament and so forth. And I really tried to find this connection with God as a way to improve myself so that I wouldn't drink. So around the time of my 21st birthday, I was living at home, and I was still drinking, but I was trying to find this connection with a God that would help me stay sober. And my father called me from downstairs to let me know there was something wrong with my mother. Now, I knew that there was because I passed by her room and she was half awake, but that wasn't unusual. My mother had a lot of mental problems, and she was constantly on some sort of a drug that made her drowsy and sleepy, and she spent a lot of time in her room. So he said there was something wrong with my mother. And so I went downstairs, and what had happened, my mother had taken an overdose intentionally, and she committed suicide. And while the paramedics were there trying to work on her to save her, I was remembering some of the things that I learned as I was trying to find this connection to God, that if I had just enough faith as a mustard seed, if I would just believe that God would answer my prayer, that he would. So I did my best to pray for her to live as if I believed, but she didn't live, and she died. Now, I think I misunderstood the theology probably, and I've learned later, that I have to accept things as they happen. But at the time, I just said, well, this doesn't work for me. I can't believe this. And so shortly before my mother's funeral, someone gave me a shot of Jack Daniels. to help me. And I got to tell you, I still remember to this day how good that felt. It was entirely soothing. It was the best shot of whiskey I ever had in my life. And so I'm back to alcohol being the medicine that helped me cope with what's going on in my life. And my drinking just progressed from there. I'm not going to say, that I was drunk every day, but I was drunk and sick and drunk and sick. And I started having problems at work, and I started having problems legally. I started getting drunk driving arrests. I had 3 DUIs 3 years in a row, one year in a row for 3 years. And this was back in the 80s, and they were starting to get tough about it back then. But the way it is now, on your 3rd DUI, I think it's a felony. You go to prison. So at that time, it wasn't quite that bad, though it was quite serious. In fact, believe it or not, I didn't actually even lose my license on that 3rd DUI. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, so I had that 3rd DUI, and that actually cost me everything I had at the time, which really wasn't a whole lot. But I lost my job. I lost my apartment. I was deeply ashamed of myself. I didn't want anybody to know how out of control my life was. So they didn't know. The people that I was closest to, my family, they didn't know what was going on with me. I tried to hide all of this stuff. So ultimately, though, when I did call Alcoholics Anonymous after my 3rd arrest, they let me out of jail, and I was trying to find my car. And to get there, I had to cross the bridge over I-35. And I remember stopping halfway across the bridge. I thought, I'm just going to jump. But I was looking at the cars going by, and I couldn't do that. I don't think I could have done it anyway. But so I walked over to the other side of the bridge, and I called AA. And I'll never forget that moment when the person answered the phone, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I told him, I think I need help. And he told me where there was a meeting near where I worked at the time. And so I went to that meeting, and that's where I guess I started, where people were sharing with me their stories, and they gave me hope. And I really needed that. I guess I reached a point where we talked about in our first step where I surrendered. I knew I was powerless over alcohol, and my life had become unmanageable. In fact, I'd never even heard those words before until that first meeting when I saw them on the wall. But I found them to be totally, entirely appropriate to what was going on with me. I was and am powerless over alcohol, and my life was unmanageable. There's no doubt about it. And these people gave me hope. And there was another thing on the wall, that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And that was also really important for me, because as odd as it is, and I know that you understand this, that we use denial as a way to cope with our drinking when it's out of control. And it really should have been obvious to me that I had a problem with alcohol. It was obvious to other people. But I did not want, I denied it. And I wasn't sure if I was an alcoholic. I thought they were going to tell me I didn't belong, that I would have to go somewhere. They'd give me some sort of a test or something. I didn't want to put that label on me. I didn't know. I just knew that I needed to stop drinking. That's all I knew. And it would have been horrible if I had to admit to something, but I didn't. That was the only requirement for membership, was a desire to stop the drinking. And I did have that. And I still have that to this day. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process that I went through in my recovery as I learned it from sponsors, from the Big Book, from the 12 and 12, and from my own personal experience. And then I'm going to talk to you about this experience as I understand it today. Now, I've been sober for 29 years. In July, it'll be 30. So the way that I share my experience today is much, much different than it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So this is how it is, how I see it today. And I promise you that anybody who stays sober for a long period of time, their story too will evolve as we gain understanding of what's going on with us. So for me, the most critical thing for me was honesty. I had to be honest about the problem. I had to admit and accept that I was an alcoholic. I had to come to believe that there was some hope for me in what we would call step 2. I had to believe that there was a solution. And I came to believe that solution was Alcoholics Anonymous. Mm-hmm. And at some point, I had to make a decision, step 3, to change. I had to make a decision to go through the rest of the steps that follows that step 3. And that was just really critical for me. And all of that was happening to me maybe sequentially, but also at the same time. I was having these realizations as I was going to meetings and learning from you about your experience with these things. I said, yeah, me too. That's what I'm going through. I'm having that same thing. I also believe I need to change. So I worked through the big book, and I worked through the 12 and 12 with my sponsor. And we learned how to do these steps. And it's interesting, though, that I would go to different people in the group, especially when I was getting into step 4, and I'd ask each one of them how they did that inventory. And I was frustrated because everybody had a little bit of a different way. And later I learned that it doesn't matter precisely exactly how you do it. The main thing is that you do it, for me anyway. And I found it very beneficial. As I went through that process, I learned to be honest with myself and to put things into context. Now, I'm talking about my mother and father primarily, and I mentioned how my father beat me, and my mother would say derogatory things about me and so forth, and that definitely affected my self-esteem, and that definitely affected my sense of security, and they were definitely things that I had to find ways to cope with, and so that was some damage that they had done to me. But I had done some things like that myself too. And what I guess I was able to do is when I learned about my own humanity and myself as a human being and my own faults, I could accept those of my parents and others. I could see the good and the bad. And I knew that they were doing the best that they could with what they had and their experience. And they weren't all bad. They gave me a lot of good things. I mean, the qualities that I have to even be open to getting help, I got from my grandmother and my mother and my father. So I got some good things from them too. But I guess going through this process, what was really important was not about them. It was about me. How I was reacting to these events in my life. How did my mother's suicide affect me as a person? And how did that change my behaviors? How did it drive my drinking? All of those things were very helpful to me. But then to sit down with another person and actually have that conversation and to get feedback and him to share with me similar things that he had been through was just incredibly helpful and healing for me. I'll never forget when I left that meeting after my 5th step with my then sponsor. I truly did feel like I was part of the human race. I felt like no longer did I need to be ashamed of myself. I was just a human being like anybody else. And my parents were too. So now my job in recovery, a lot of it hinges on those 2 steps, 6 and 7, all about those character defects. And character defects sometimes has a bad rap in our culture today because we kind of think about it like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Well, look at it this way. This is how I look at it. I'm a human being. I have a character, the way that I interact with other people. And there are certain traits that I have in my personality. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. A lot of them are ways that I've learned to adapt to whatever was going on in my life. I used to lie. I used to lie a lot. I used to lie about my dream. I used to steal. That's not really great character, but that's what I did to adapt. Those are things like lying, for example, was a great way to continue with my drinking. It was a great way to get out of a problem. It was a great way, probably more really anything else to put off a problem. But I guess what I'm trying to say is for me, it's not a matter of judging myself as good or bad, but it's just recognizing these traits of my personality and just trying to improve and seeking whatever way possible to improve. And that could mean, like, for example, dealing with clinical depression, which I've had to do since I've been in the program, and getting over the fear of going to a doctor and talking about it and asking for help. That could include, going to AA meetings. That could include, reading books. That's all kinds of different ways that I have of building character. But it's very important to me to this day to stay honest with myself and to understand who I am. And then, of course, I'm not going to, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I found a lot of healing in the steps. I eventually was able to make amends to people in my family and people that I worked for who were affected by my drinking. And these amends to me were really ways of changing the way that I was treating them, changing my behaviors and acknowledging the behaviors that I had. When it came to my father, I did not sit down with him and have a face-to-face conversation because it would have been too difficult and painful for him, but I did change my behaviors. He ended up dying after I was 10 years sober. He was 64, and he died really kind of unexpectedly. But when he died, I was at peace with our relationship. I was okay with him, and I knew that he was okay with me. When he was on his deathbed, I let him know that I loved him, and I'm glad I had that opportunity to say that and to say goodbye and to let him go. So I don't really have any regrets about, that. Now, had I not tried to make amends through changing my behaviors and being a good son, without being honest to him about who I was and what I was doing, I might have had some regrets. So I'm very thankful to AA for giving me that opportunity to change and to reconnect with my father and to be able to have some peace about me when he passed away. And when people die, people that you love, and unfortunately the older you get, the more people you know that have gone on, they're still with you in some way. And my father and my mother are still with me. My grandmother is still with me. The good that they gave me is still with me. These steps are still important to me today. Like I say, I've been sober for a long time, but I still use these steps because I'm still a flawed person. Most recently, a good example of this is I had a problem at work last year. I was ready to get fired. I wasn't doing my job the way that I needed to do it. So they wrote me up. They were going to fire me. That was it. They said, you better change. You have X amount of time to change. It was like 60 days. If you don't, you're out. And nobody thought I could do it. They thought they were ready to get rid of me. Well, I had to take a look about what was going on with me at work, just like I had to do with my alcoholism. I had to be really honest. First of all, I had to admit that there was a problem. They're getting ready to fire me. Something's wrong, right? And I had to believe that there was hope. And the hope for me was that this process that I learned through Alcoholics Anonymous, and I needed to make a decision to change my behaviors at work. So I did an inventory. I looked at what was going on with me at work. What was I doing there? And why was I doing that? And then after having this understanding of myself about the truth about what was going on there, I was able to put a plan in place to make some changes at work. And I was very successful. And I did change. And I was very successful. In fact, I just got my review. My boss says, everybody's amazed. They think this is an amazing success story. Nobody thought you could do it. And I keep thinking, well, golly, you know what? I think to myself, you don't even know the stuff, that I've been able, with help, to overcome. I tell you I'm an atheist. I don't believe that there's a supernatural being that helps me, but I feel so connected to you and Alcoholics Anonymous. You're the ones that made it possible for me to do this. You're the ones that taught me these things. And I know that many of you have faith, and I respect that faith. And I know that it works, because I've seen it change people. So I'm just so grateful to you for giving me these tools and for giving me the opportunity to sit with you in these meetings, regardless of who I am, what I believe. Speaking of the atheism, I'll talk about my group a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about service in AA, and I'm going to talk about some things that maybe you might not know about, and maybe you do, maybe you might not care about, you might find it a little bit boring, I don't know. Some time ago, after about 25 years of sobriety, I came to terms with the fact that I am an atheist. There's just no doubt about it for me. And it did concern me because I was wondering, what the heck am I going to do with these steps? But as you just heard through my story, these steps are very important to me. And basically, what is important to me is the practical action that you take in these steps. A higher power is nothing more than what empowers me to take the action. And you are who empowers me to take this action. So that's my understanding of the program. It's essentially the same as anyone else who might believe or not believe. But it was a difficult time because no matter how I might want to word it, some people at my home group, they weren't happy with this idea that I had, because there was this idea that, eventually there would come a time and place when no human power would relieve my alcoholism and so forth. And so there was a need for me to connect with people who would accept me and my reliance on other people. So I learned that atheists and agnostics have been in AA since the beginning. And I've learned that we have AA groups specifically for agnostics and atheists, and have since 1975. When I first learned about these atheist and agnostic AA meetings, there were like 250 of them, I think, and that was in 2014. Now there's over 500 of them. So we're growing quite a bit, and I want to talk a little bit about that and some of what I've done within this community. This might bore you a little bit. So I helped start the We Agnostics group because I still needed that connection with other alcoholics. I needed a place where I could share my recovery as I understood it without feeling like I was judged. And I'm not going to say that the people in AA were judging me, but I kind of felt that way. So I had to have a comfortable place. And in doing that, I learned about this whole community of us that were online. There was a website called AA Agnostica, and I learned about this convention that was going to take place in Santa Monica, California for agnostics and atheists from around the world. And I went to that convention, and I got to meet one of the women who started that convention, and she gave me an opportunity to speak there and so forth. And it was an amazing experience because there were two speakers in particular that really made a big impression on me. One of them was a former chair of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, and his name was Reverend Ward Ewing. He spoke at that conference. And also the general manager at that time of the General Service Office, Phyllis H., also spoke at that conference. And that just totally blew me away, what they had to say, the message that they had to deliver about how AA truly is all-encompassing of everybody, that it doesn't matter what you believe or don't believe. There's a place for you in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that the 12 steps are completely adaptable for anybody. Believe whatever you want to believe that empowers you to work these steps. But take the action, and you might find that it helps you keep your sobriety. I met people from all over the world who were starting these secular AA meetings. And then after the convention, I got together with some people, and we decided we were going to create an organization. We were going to create an international organization that would somehow bring all these atheists and agnostics together to create more groups. And we started a website, and we created this organization. We started having some fights. There's a lot of, believe it or not, disagreement within our little niche of AA. Yes. And this is something I've had to learn about in service work in AA, whether it be within the agnostic atheist community or just with other AA people. I have to learn how to disagree. And I'm not really good at it, to be honest with you. But there is a contingent within the agnostic atheist movement that I would call, and they call themselves as militant atheists. And these people, they believe that we atheists should not be involved with the AA general service structure, that we should just have our meetings and not let other people notice us. And not only do they believe that, but they come after people like me who want to be involved, who do want to work the steps and adapt the steps and so forth. So there's quite a battle. And the battle is that I don't give a damn what they believe, but they do care what I believe. So there's a real issue with that. So we fight amongst ourselves. Then recently too, and I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but I had some serious disagreements with the central office. I was on their board of directors, and I didn't like the way that things were going down there, and I still have some strong feelings about that. But I'm not really proud of the way that I reacted to the board. I did eventually resign from there because of the things that I saw going on there. But I do need to do a better job of learning how to just accept that there are going to be differences between me and other people in AA. But I'm pretty new to the service thing. I didn't get involved with general service until I helped start the We Agnostics group. And when I did get involved in general service through the district and the area, the people that I noticed the most were from the Paseo group. At the time, Floyd was our district committee chair, or district committee, what do they call them, DCM. And I really looked up to the people from the Paseo group, and I really admired that whenever I'd go to area assembly, that all these people from the Paseo group would be there. And I also loved that they were so open and welcoming of me. And I started, making friends, and I just, really, they inspired me. And I want my group to be like the Paseo group when it comes to service. And so I'm really working hard for that. And it's not easy trying to get people involved in general service because of what I just talked about. We fight a lot, right? but it is very rewarding. It's really rewarding to be able to meet people from different parts of the state. Right now we got something really exciting going on in the area assembly, and it really happened as a result of people from the Paseo group speaking up. And we have this diversity committee, and John R., who will be celebrating here soon, he heads up that committee. And it's just incredible. The discussions that we have now at area assembly about race, about feeling safe in AA, about embracing diversity, it's just absolutely amazing. We have conversations there that are difficult to have. Some people get mad, but people need to hear what they're having. And what I'm learning about this is that, we might not be able to change individual people, but we can change a culture. And that's what I'm noticing happening because of the things that the Paseo group is doing and the diversity thing that we got going on at area assembly. We're starting to make a difference in the culture. People are hearing what's going on. People are understanding what it's like. A black person who is dealing with racism in Missouri and has to go to an AA meeting. They hear about that at area assembly, and those are difficult things to talk about, but they are things that we need to talk about. What's it like to be an atheist in Missouri? Sharing your experience, strength, and hope. These are things. So we are beginning to change a culture, and I'm going to close by just telling you how much I do love and respect Alcoholics Anonymous, and in spite of what I believe that your faith works, that if you have a faith in God, that faith is keeping you sober. There's no doubt in my mind. And I want that faith to continue to keep you sober. But if one doesn't believe in God, like myself, Alcoholics Anonymous will keep you sober. It keeps me sober, and I believe that as well. And thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thanks,